we need to respect the gender diversity, so I have given you my chair, keeping that respect up. So, gentlemen, let's give a round of applause to the panelists. As they say that the proof of the pudding is in eating it, all the panelists represent the supply chain function, and they, despite the tough traffic conditions that we have, all of them were on time. So that's a very clear indication that I think, and I'm sure they're managing their supply chain and logistics pretty well. Thanks for that. This panel is, the effort of this panel is going to be to see how, insights with their personal experiences and their understanding about what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening in industry, etc. These type of insights will be shared by them, the panelists, with the audience that is here. What's important for us to understand, is basically the topic that we're talking about here is the complexity of the supply chain, sequencing our actions in order to be able to manage the current complexity in supply chain. And what's very important also to understand is, first of all, is what is complex? What has become complex? Sometimes, under the garb of complexity, we make a lot of perceptions about our businesses and start feeling that everything has become complex. Okay, I think it's very critical at this time of the decade that we are in, and in the future, is to declutter the complexity. Meaning, clearly identify what is complex in your business situation. In many cases, it's been seen that what is complex in your business situation is not complex in another business situation. So let's become very specific to our businesses. Let's introspect our businesses with the current conditions and look at what is applicable in terms of complexity to my business, and therefore we should start addressing those problems, in very specific form. I would like to share with you, some of the quotes that have been written by top supply chain leaders, all over the world, including Indian leaders, many of them. It says that the supply chain function has evolved over time on the back of the industrial and retail growth. I think this is completely an acceptable statement, that what we have seen in the past 10 years happen to supply chain, and I'm not going to keep repeating and harping the pandemic and the COVID-19. I think, yes, it has passed in terms of its infection to people, but however, I would say it is still sleeping behind. It's there. We have learned a lot to handle this scenario, but all these changes have happened because of retail and the e-commerce business. The supply chain function by itself has started coming in the front, of businesses because of trying to manage not only the complexity, but the situations that have got created in the marketplace, the changing customer behavior, the changing customer demands and expectations, and also the lot of product proliferation that's taken place, reduction in overall life cycle of products, etc., have led to a huge differentiating factor as far as the Department of Supply Chain is concerned. Wherein the customers are served while riding on the B2B and B2C. I mean, there was a time when people felt that B2C complexity was a complexity that we had to manage. Today, even B2B distribution complexities continue to exist because of the fragmentation of the supply chain. Second thing is geography is another complexity which has bring forth various issues and challenges. When I talk of geography, I mean, if you look at the internet penetration in the country, the internet penetration has substantially gone up in our country itself, fine, which means that you have the smartphones availability, fine, right up to B, C, and even D class cities. Over 90% of Indian districts now are covered through the internet, which also means that there are customers who are able to see what you and I see in a city like Bombay, Delhi, are also able to see there. They are able to order A lot of PIN codes now have got covered. Today, if you look at in terms of geographical coverage, over 75% of Indian PIN codes are now covered through last mile delivery, which means that you can start ordering. And all these things and functionalities that are now available create a lot of, I would say, homework on the supply chain side to be done and challenges to be done. So this is one big complexity when we talk about geographical spread. There has been a big paradigm change in the way we used to look at the world. At one point, people started believing, and we continue to believe, that we are one world, it's one geography, it's one territory. But after the pandemic, we have started also realizing how this one world brings challenges that need to be addressed, especially when we talk about cross-border movement, when we talk about availability of capacity on shipping lines, when we talk about availability of capacity on air, and we talk about the various regulatory framework that needs to be adhered to when it talks. So these are complexities which are macroeconomic complexities which need to be dealt with as time moves on. Having said all this, the complexities are realities of life. Businesses have to grow because it's all about growth. Businesses have to profiteer because it's the core to a business. Customers need to continue to get new products, and customer service has to be as close as 100%, which means that you should get the product when you need it, in full, on time, every time, all the time. Okay, so these are givens. So we are all working towards managing complexity on one side and customer expectation on the other side. Fine. And companies who are able to seamlessly integrate these two paradigms together, fine, without hurdles and problems, you will find those companies excel. I think the overall objective of such conferences is to see that how do we share insights, experts share their insights in order to bridge these two paradigms seamlessly. So I would say that though the pandemic is on the other side, but it has not just been shut, it's not over, okay? It's not a short-term crisis, it's a long-term crisis. It continues to brew in some form or the other. It has long-lasting implications for how people work and how supply chains function, and will continue to function. There are pressing needs for businesses to build long-term resilience in the value chain for managing future challenges. This is very important for us to understand. And finally, the capability would be technology-led. The bridge that you will create will be technology-led. It will be leveraging platforms between one platform and the other that support applied analytics. And as you deep dive and get into the science of that, you would find that applied analytics will start playing a big role. Machine learning, artificial intelligence has already started making inroads even into our houses. By the time that you pick up the phone, and sometimes you realize you're talking about a product and suddenly you pick up your phone and the first thing that emerges on your Google is, and you start saying, how the hell did he know that I was actually talking about a perfume? And this perfume comes up right on top, you know? So this is the artificial intelligence that is, and analytics that's constantly working behind your set, you know, and is throwing these aspects to you. So you can understand what is all available to us, which is making life on the other side easy, and business operations and planning and forecasting also a lot more easier, while customers continue to create the complexity on the other side. This panel will discuss setting the sequence for complex supply chain. Okay, so I would start, you know, we have been talking about mitigation of risk, and I'll start with Sandeep. Sandeep, how should businesses mitigate supply chain disruption for the future? I mean, we have seen this large disruption in the past 2 years. You know, we have been talking about mitigation, you know, in various conferences, in various forums. But I think what the audience would like to listen to or understand is that if you can share one or two very small prescriptions, so to say, to the audience that would let them understand how would you have handled this mitigation, and what are those 2 or 3 remedies that you would suggest to them?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. So pandemic actually shook us all. So it gives a proper structure at DataClick to employ something called supply chain risk management. So what we did is we took certain approaches. So we divide 2 strategies. First is the resistance. Resistance is nothing but an proactive approach, and the recovery. Recovery is nothing but the reactive approach. So proactive approach or resistance is building redundancies in your supply chain. But then there is always a limitation of how much redundancy could you build in a supply chain, keeping in mind the viability of the financial viability of a supply chain operation. And recovery is how fast you damage control and reduce the impact on your revenue loss because of the damage or the loss of customer experience, customer trust onto it. So we realized that handling a disruption is nothing but applying the permutation and combination of resistance or recovery to the severity of the incidents. And how do we do that? So one way that we did is we actually mapped all the disruptive incidences in a past and in future also, including the pandemic, over the probability of those incidents happening versus the impact those instances would have. So for example, let's say COVID. COVID is a low probability happening, but it's a very high impact incidents. Vis-a-vis, on the other end, let's say data breach or disruption into your delivery channels, right? Those are or the strikes or machine going down and reducing the complexity of their operation. They approach to the secretaries of the housing societies and told them that, for entire society, you place an order. So it would be like truck full load order and just point-to-point order. On the other hand, so that is about the recovery. On the resistance part of it, let's say if we know that data breaches often happen, so we employed a very high InfoSec stringent policies. We started training our people and monitoring their devices. In terms of delivery channel disruptions, we analyzed every single delivery lane, point A to point B, and then we taken 2 approaches, that is multimodal approach. So almost 90-95% of our lane have the rail, road and air connection. So just to juggle in between if there's anything goes wrong, and also the multi-carrier approach. So of course, nobody employs only one logistic partner, but we ensure that on every single lane that we serve, we have at least minimum 2 to 3 logistic partners serving us, right? It is like mitigating your risk over the long period. So what we have realized is that supply chain disruptions will happen, right? Within your control or beyond your control. But understanding the severity of the incidents, mapping it accordingly, and employing the resistance or recovery or a combination of these both is something what has really helped us, and that is what I think is the solution for addressing and reducing mitigations. Thank you.
Good. I think you brought up, this quadrant that you created by saying that, high occurrence, low impact, and occurrence once in a couple of years or a decade, but very high impact like the COVID happened, and how you then, managed to address these two situations, two different high and low situations. I think this is very well put. I'm sure it's going to be extremely benefiting, to the people who've heard it. Thank you for sharing this very, very interesting insight. Now, let's come back to, the other aspect. When we try to mitigate risk on one side, the aspect of being in a constant situation, a situation of which is called as the VUCA situation. Why? Now we are in a VUCA world, in the sense that we were quite hunky-dory, and the birds were chirping and the flowers were flowering and so forth. But suddenly, 2019, we started realizing. I think there was also a very short-sightedness as far as the human was concerned. So much that we were doing with the environment, and so much that we were, really abusing everything that we had with us. And came 2019 end, and we realized that we were in an extreme pandemic scenario. Okay, we continue to remain in that scenario. As we look deeper, we realize that though one pandemic is over, there is another thing which is happening. Fine. We are seeing how the environment is being abused. We are seeing the issues in terms of energy not being conserved, and so forth. It is stated that we are in a VUCA environment, which means what? Fine, and I was just being reminded by one of the panelists, that I said most of us think that the VUCA word abbreviation is a Japanese term, like Kaizen and Pokayoke and so on and so forth. It is not. It actually comes from the army, like the word strategy came from army, logistics came from army, from the defense forces. Similarly, the word VUCA, which basically is an abbreviation to, if somebody wants to expand, does anyone wants to take the bite in expanding the VUCA? Okay, I'll help you. Volatility, V for volatility, U, uncertainty, C for complexity, and A for ambiguity. Fine. Now, all these words, if you see, are very dangerous to business. All these words are very dangerous to business. So the question I would like to ask, and in this order, Vikram, Harmeet, and Sandeep, okay? You can take your chances to respond, Please give us your insight on managing VUCA, the VUCA world that we are in, fine. A very relevant term in today's and future times, fine. You are all in complex businesses. You're in the business of reaching medicines to people, so lifesaver, fine. Women can't live without you, when it comes to beauty and even at home, fine. And of course, we just discussed the situation at your end, at Sandeep, when you mentioned that you provide all the luxury stuff to people, fine. Let's come back to the question. Please provide insights on the VUCA world.
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Arif, for putting across that. I mean, however more we talk about VUCA in today's business environment is not going to suffice, But I'll step back a little bit and try and paint a picture as to where we are and how we got here. I mean, supply chain disruptions are not new to professionals like us, in the supply chain fraternity. I mean, 10 years back, a tsunami in one part of the world or a volcanic eruption shutting down the North Atlantic, air freight channel, or a geopolitical situation in one part of the world, etc., etc. So disruptions have been there, and volatility, uncertainty has always been there. What really happened during COVID was unprecedented in the sense because both demand and supply complexity came to a grinding halt at the same point of time. We've had recessions where the demand has been muted, but supply channel has been good. But in COVID, both my supply upstream was impacted and downstream my demand was also impacted. Sensing demand became a challenge. I mean, I'm representing the pharma industry over here, and for us to understand the nature of medicines or drugs that the patients would need also became a challenge because the normal visitations to the doctors came to a stop, so to speak. There were a lot more online remedies, so to speak. We did not know what were the medications which are needed to fight this virus, COVID, or the symptoms which are around this. So a lot of things changed for us. So I mean, to coming back to the question, Arif, is VUCA is here to stay. So I give 3 takeaways to people. I mean, this is the time we need to reset the expectations with both the customers and the suppliers. And supply chain needs to play a very important role to let them know that gone are the days then, we place an order and within 15 days you could get the raw material in and you could, convert your manufacturing and ship it out. We need to plan, we need to have end-to-end visibility. So we need to reset the expectations both upstream and downstream. That is number 1 in my mind. Number 2, I would say is, build strong collaboration with your vendors and suppliers. Visibility, not just to your suppliers, but to your suppliers. Because what COVID has taught us is that just having visibility of what inventories you have and what your suppliers have is not enough. I mean, what your suppliers is having is very important. I'll give you a very quick example in pharma, we all know during COVID, we all had to use these PPP kits, and the mask, etc. I mean, these are made of some fibers and, some special material. None of us realized that so much of these PPP kits were being made that the vendors who were supplying these materials to make filters which are used to make injectables, not just vaccines, but other kinds of injectables, etc., for the filtration process, these are going to get short. And these are, very validated processes for a pharma industry. We can't just change vendor A to B. So that is when we realize that not just understanding how your vendor is having the inventory or you are having the inventory is going to be enough. And the last very important thing is, supply chain is here. We should take the center stage and let businesses know that we are not just here to, coordinate and drive, but we are here to enable businesses grow. So that's my take, Arif. Yeah.
Good point. I think resetting expectation in my understanding, extremely critical from that point of view. And this is one challenge that we keep happening with regards to, I think the supply chain is always fighting with expectations and mostly internal. Mostly internal. Whether it comes to sales functions, production functions, financial functions, all of them, there are huge expectations, and the resetting of the expectations is very critical. If you don't reset the expectations, you will have supply chains fall. It's like always expecting your child to achieve 100%, and then you say, why are you sad? He did not get 100%. I think let's set the expectations right, and vendor management is the other part. Harpreet, let's hear from you.
Hello. Thank you very much, and morning to all. Not to add too much of it because I think it's already covered. Few bit of it is on ambiguity, and again, going back to COVID. I think so the important part being supply chain, being always a support function, you always need to see how the business is working. And COVID was a time when everything was closed, and with all those government regulations that you need to sell essentials only. So I'm from our personal care, we can sell only your shampoos, face washes and all those stuff. Now that is something you need to change it at the same moment in terms of all the catalog which is there. You need to change that catalog and you will be selling only 2 or 3 products. Now that's important because yes, business needs to go. So one change is all the stock which is available there, you just need to change everything and selling only to the distributors, the face washes and your hair care products. Another ambiguity comes out is, which is like, you must have remembered that there were red zone, green zone, amber zone, orange zones. Now you need to check which of the distributors are open and who will be taking the stock and who can sell the stock to the market. So these are something which nobody planned about it, and it come immediately and you need to action about it. So that's one thing which we have already seen as a practical example. 2, from a back-end operations, which is purely from a demand planning side of it, is that normally you do a demand planning on a monthly cycle, but now this brings to you with a weekly cycle. A weekly cycle in terms of how your movements are working, how the week would be going. That is something which we as an organization and also from a supply chain point of view, we start moving into a weekly cycle just to get a better clarity on how the production would be happening and how we can support the business going forward is something which we have done it especially in the COVID side. Thank you.
Excellent. I would take away the point on demand planning. I think forecasting and planning continues to remain an extremely weak side of the supply chain even today, to be very honest. I mean, I know we're all trying our best. There are softwares, there's data availability, et cetera, et cetera. However, we still not got it completely right. And that is where we find excess inventories in warehouses because of wrong forecasting, probably. We are unable to plan our dispatches, and therefore you end up with delays and loss of sale. So I think planning and forecasting is something which we need to constantly keep sharpening on a day-to-day basis. And I think internally, insights need to be accrued within the organizations, and you need to really seriously work on these insights. By the way, I would always suggest, that please involve the distribution center managers, the warehouse managers, because they actually end up with a lot of insights and a lot of shit actually that falls in the warehouse because of the wrongdoings or the shortcomings at different departmental levels. Is something we need to be a little more wary about, and we should take feedback from that operating level. Sandeep, quickly, in addition to what they said,
Sure. I'll talk about how in typical e-commerce, how do we handle VUCA, right? So we use predictive and prescriptive analysis. So predictive analysis is machine learning and data analysis help us understand or help us reduce the volatility between the demand and a supply gap, right? Or it helps us understand the behavioral uncertainty that as a consumer or the customer, all of us show. So what we do is, there are lots of predictive algorithm that we have at Tata Click. So one of that algorithm tells us that if a certain customer orders something, what is the best logistic partner, what is the best speed, what is the best category, or what is the best lane, and on a combination of all that, so as to make that order a successful order. And we define a successful order is order which get delivered within the promised timeline. There is no return on that order, and customer doesn't have to contact us at all. Where is my order and all that stuff. So this is something as a predictive analysis which helps us reduce the VUCA. Another one algorithm which tells us if we get an order, so we have some 6,000 seller location all across India and we could fulfill order from any one of them. So which is the best seller location that order should get assigned to reduce the logistic cost and increase the reliability. Again, it's in predictive analytics. And also when we buy inventory in a limited fashion, where to keep that inventory. So keeping right inventory at the right place will always help us giving faster promises, reducing shipping costs and all that stuff. So this is about the predictive stuff. Prescriptive is, it could be as low tech as monitoring every single scan on every single touch point of an journey of an shipment. Or it could be monitoring the movement of your trucks using GPS. And any untimely scan or any delayed scan is in probable disruption. And we could take action noticing those scan against the timelines that we have and could do the damage control before actual damage could happen. So these are the couple of predictive and prescriptive analysis using the machine learning data analysis is what we are trying to handle VUCA.
Very good. I think you should take time out to understand from him these two concepts, predictive and prescriptive. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. However, most of these and all these analytics are all data-based. They are based on experiential data, on live data, and you are collecting data or not. So I think the most fundamental, grassroots requirement is that start ensuring that you collect data and you are constantly real-time collecting data. That means you have applications, softwares, that are currently looking at when deliveries took place, what was the time of dispatch, blah, 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 everything. Without data collection, I don't think Excel sheets are going to help you in doing any predictive analytics. I think it's something which has to be data-driven, and organizations will have to not consider ROIs on most of these softwares and applications. It is necessity of doing business. Now I come to these, thanks for the great insights for each one of you. Let's move ahead now and start looking at, so we still are in the VUCA world, okay? And Rajsi, I'll start with you, then go to Ashish, and then we'll come back to Harmeet. On what role do you think, and specifically on the VUCA side, what role do you think that people and machines are going to play, in managing the VUCA situation? Specifically people and machines. And what is required? People will play, and therefore, how should people be equipped to handle that?
So first of all, good morning, everyone. And before I start answering that question, whether people or machine will be able to handle the situation in the VUCA world, I just want to take a step back and change the definition of how we are defining the world around us. So while we've been talking about VUCA, but I think a more fitting definition for this world around us is Bani, and this is something that I'm borrowing from Mr. Mehta, who's our CEO, and the way he describes the world around us. So what used to be volatile is actually now not reliable and therefore brittle. People used to feel uncertain, and now people are feeling anxious about things. And if we talk about the way people perceived the world around us, it was complex, but now we are seeing that it is governed by a lot of non-linear equations, and what used to be ambiguous is now incomprehensible. And why I wanted to bring out this point of Bani was that when we use the term Bani to describe the world around us, what we are really saying is that it has more context and more emotion associated when we are describing the world as Bani, and therefore it cannot be totally machine-driven. At the same time, when we are describing the world as Bani, we are saying that now we have more complex problems to solve. And therefore, we need more human might to solve those problems. And therefore, we will still need machines. So the way to solve this situation is somewhere in between. It's a hybrid, and I would rather say it would have to be a segmented approach to solve this problem. So the problems which are more mundane in nature, problems like tracking KPIs, problems like MISs, they will have to be automated, and through simple processes like RPAs. But if we are talking about more involved problem statements, that is where we will use machine learning and AI to basically solve for those problems, and where human intervention will still be required, but just taking a very simple example. Say, for example, there is a demand spurt in one part of the country, and we really need to react to that demand spurt and address that demand. So in the current situation, or rather, I would say not the current situation, but a few years back, how we would address that situation is people would talk to each other, the supply planner would take some time to change the plans, then correspondingly the material planner would plan for those materials, and by the time we are addressing that demand, we are actually losing a lot of time. So how digitization or machine-driven problem-solving approach will help us here is that today, all of this data, how companies are working is that they're creating data lakes. All of these systems are, the data are all together, the data points are all together, and those linkages are well established already. So when you are seeing a demand spurt, what AI, ML, and those algorithms do is that they just send an alert to the supply planner that there is capacity available on line number 2, should I assign the production plan? And what the supply planner has to do is just acknowledge that information. And again, it triggers the material plan. And that is how in this process we save a lot of time, and at the same time we are able to address that demand spurt. And the third part that I would want to talk about, the third part of solving this problem is strategic in nature, and which will largely be people-driven as so far as I see it, because there is a lot of context involved when strategic decisions are taken, policies, environmental context, public context, and therefore those decisions would largely remain people-driven so far as I can visualize it. So that is how, yeah.
Women are from Venus and men are from Mars. That's why you explain things so differently. Fine. So I think a huge round of applause for what she just said, you know. So it's from VUCA to Bani, okay? And I really like that fact. The B was very interesting. I think the brittleness, the fragility, fine, in current situation is really something that is very hard to deal with. Very fragile, very brittle, and you explained it pretty well. Thanks for that. Ashish, you know, coming back to you, or rather coming to you, in your context of business, you come from Everest Industries, you know, I'm sure you are looking at a completely different, you know, way of stuff. There are different types of customers on the other side. The need is different, the requirement is different. Your supply chain is quite different from what I can see the supply chains of others, you know. How do you plan to handle this volatile situation, or rather brittle situation, let me say? You know?
Thank you, Arif, and very well covered by Rashid. I would like to add, we are a building solutions company, and I think we supply roofing, boards and panel, and, you know, pre-engineered building to various customers. Especially the pandemic example, because we talked about it, we were not an essential commodity, though like a pharmaceutical and, you know, like a food were the essential. But we realized that the product goes to the small customers, small villages for the housing, and there is a period where they need to change their roof. And if the roof is not available, you can imagine that in a monsoon, how they'll handle it. So we put our pitch to the government, we got the approval, and we got, you know, that to run our plant, and again, you know, like supplying the product. Similarly, the product goes to for the COVID hospital, because we have to build hospital in a record time. Our product is that fast in construction. So we got both approval. But again, why man and machine are equally important? Once you get the approval, you need to have people to run the line. And you can imagine that a lot of contract labor, you know, fled away to their villages. So we left with the 30% of the employees. Again, if they're not motivated, you can't do anything. So we manage to run the plant more effectively, more efficiently with 30% of the labor and produce the highest number of production and highest number of dispatches. Now, here the men plays an important role because if they are available, they are motivated, you can create the difference. And again, volatility, because supply chain, the VUCA world, all the uncertainty is going to be there always. And if you got a person, employees, fully motivated, fully trained, they can create the difference. Now I talk about the machine part. Now the man is motivated. If the machine or support system is not strong, they can't do much on that. So for example, I'll just give an analogy of Mumbai yellow black cab, right? We were used to get all those move from one place to other place in yellow black cab. And then this came with Ola and Uber. What is the difference? The main does not change. The person who's driving may be the same. But we have equipped with latest technology. He knows where my customer is. He knows where the customer has to go. We have trained him on how to behave, how to talk. And you can see the difference between both the things. Here the man is same, but the technology is creating a difference. I think overall in supply chain, the combination of both man and the machine we have to invest. Company has to invest. Company has to be successful. Then they need to put a lot of focus on both. We are a last link of the supply chain because we are creating experience for the customer. If my truck driver or the last mile delivery person is not trained, not motivated, I think I can have a good product with right quality and right cost, but the delivery is not done. So that way, I think both, man and machine are equally important to win the confidence of the customer. Thank you.
Great perspective when you talk about people and how people make a difference. Actually, yes, people make the difference. At the end of the day, if there were no people, there wouldn't have been any business. So people on one side are consumers and people on the other side are producers. Fine. On both the ends, you have people. Sure, you represent L'Oreal. If you did not have faces, then you would not have been in business. Am I right? Body lotions wouldn't have sold so much. Fine. So he comes from L'Oreal, cosmetic leader, giant. Fine. In your opinion, apart from the fact that people are important to you for business, how did people make a difference in managing situations for you? Or have people and machine, both as a combination, have? And if they have, please share your insights on that.
Hello. So, in a simple way, I just explain you a combination between a people and a machine learning. So, if you see the chain start with people first. In between, you can have your machine language and then the output. So, it's basically like an input which will be given by people, or let's say because AI and ML always works on your past history. So, whenever any of an organization wants to start up any of the new tools, first thing is you need to provide a database into that system, and that will be done by people. So people will be giving you all the database, all customization would be done with the help of AI ML, and the output again will be taken care by people itself. So the input and the output, you need people to do an action on it. And I still remember Rashri was telling about the spikes. That is something, a system will give you a baseline. So it's a typical word which we normally use it in a demand planning system. It's a baseline flow. Output will be given by an AI ML. But how do you manage the spikes on the same baseline is something which will be done by people. And also a beautiful example on the same, and a practical example is we know East as a region, and we know Pujo as one of the major, I would say, festival for East. Now, Pujo will change month, year after year. So some month it would be in a month of October, some month it will be in a month of November. Baseline will give you an output. Now, how do you change it? Something which will be done by people. So in my sense, and I give more importance to people, and that's how it's always been there. Thank you.
Very good point. I think distortion, data would give you, and analytics will give you distortion in the data, or distortion in the pattern of consumption, or distortion in trends. Managing the distortion is, I think, something which people can only take, because their decision making needs to be done. So data will only present, its finally decision making is the human capital which will take the decision. Great point, excellent. Rajshri, fine, I come back to you. With the changing world and finite resources. I think we all agree that we are living in a world which has finite resources. You know, you do not have infinite resources. This world is going to finally extinguish one day. You know, I don't know how many years later, but will finally. So everything's going to finish slowly and slowly. And we are consuming at a very high pace, extremely high pace. So with this finite resources that exist on this planet Earth, in what ways do you think responsibility and sustainability frameworks across supply chains need to be aligned? Responsibility, sustainability.
What I think is that gone are the days when responsibility and sustainability were carried out by separate teams in the organization, especially leading the CSA front, and which were totally disjoint from the mainstream agenda that the company overall was driving. And I would not call it a supply chain agenda, but I would call it rather a company agenda when we are talking about responsibility and sustainability. And how this has to be dealt with now is that it has to be built in the DNA of how people operate. Yeah. All the decisions that we are taking, responsibility and sustainability have to be at the bedrock of those decisions. I would not even say forefront, it has to be in the baseline of those decisions. So just taking a real world example, a factory ecosystem that is operating, and we understand that for operation of that particular factory, that for, the water requirement is particularly on the higher side. Now there are two ways to approach towards solving that problem, that the factory keeps on operating and gives money to the CSA team to invest with NGOs and work on sustainability agenda. The other way to deal with this situation can be that the factory creates an ecosystem of rainwater harvesting. It also goes around in the community and educates people on rainwater harvesting. It also educates the community on ways and means of regenerative agriculture which save water, means of the irrigation technology to be used which saves water, and in turn also works on the internal processes to reduce water consumption, and in the end becomes water positive as a community. Now this is more of a symbiotic relationship that would sort of benefit the factory in the longer term, but also the community in the longer term. And these are the kind of relationships and these are the kind of ecosystems that companies now need to think about. So,
very good, yeah. Good, absolutely fine. I think we need to look at, first of all, I think the important point that she mentioned is that one team, these are not two separate teams. The second is the approach needs to be completely 360 degree. It has to be holistic on both the sides. It's not only a purely corporate responsibility. It's also to do with, finally there is a receiver at the other end, and both need to shake hands together and collaborate in order to be able to achieve the sustainability aspect. I'm sure, you know, in our own respective businesses, there are several small, large, big, medium-sized initiatives that have been taken. We will come to that in a separate question towards the end of our discussion. Now let me come back to Ashish. Ashish, over the past decade or so, we have seen that the tables have actually turned. Where we had a supplier-customer relationship went on to building vendor-customer relationship. I don't know what was the difference between vendor and supplier, but still, you know. And finally, people start talking about partner. At least that was more of a lip service. I don't believe that we've actually moved from meaning anything else, just the word partner. But today, if you see, in this type of a world that we are in, the tables have turned. Suppliers play a very important role. I won't say that they are holding you or they are, arm twisting, but I'm saying they are in an extremely commanding position when it comes to relationship management. And a lot of it also depends on the buyer. So my question to you is that over the decade or so, the tables have turned when it comes to vendor management. How do you ensure and how is maintaining a concrete approach for long-term supplier management so critical? You come from you just mentioned that yes, Everest is in the PEB industry, and we as warehouse design company, Quantic Consulting buys a lot of pre-engineered buildings or recommends a lot, and Everest is a major supplier. But you buy steel from the various companies, and they are currently sitting on top of the business. How is that relationship maintained?
Yeah, I think you used a right, like a sentence that treat suppliers as a partner. Still, it is a word or a statement, but not being followed. But I just give an example of how it is helping us. Though I will not say we are perfect on maintaining suppliers as a partner or treating them a partner, but how it has helped us in average. So we import a lot of stuff for our product, and that comes from Russia. Again, we talk about VUCA. So we had a pandemic. It is just over, and then we got a Russia-Ukraine war. So all the import coming from Russia, we're getting it through Europe and all those channels. It was very smooth supply chain. Nobody thought about it that, is there a difficulty, and, nobody, forecasted. But suddenly that all the ban on Russian product and all those things, it resulted in that we were in a situation that the plant will stop after 4 months because the inventory is, just enough for 3 months. Now there, when you have a long-term relationship, and that is what we maintain with our Russian supplier, we found out a way that instead of Russia, instead of Europe, we can route it through a different channel, through a complete, maybe longer route coming from, a larger distance to cover in Russia and then going through a different port. And we get it to instead of JNPT and, like a Kochi port to a Mundra port because it is, they're able to handle this product. I think all those things possible because they had a trust and we had a trust on them. And the relationship was long lasting, like we are getting this product from them for the last 10 years, 12 years. They were confident. Now, in that situation, our competitor was struggling, but we were able to get the product or, the raw material without hassle. Yes, it took time, it took some extra cost, but there was a confidence. And now the relationship is much, much stronger. Now, situation like pandemic, situation like, Russia-Ukraine war will keep on coming. But if you get a relationship with supplier and you treat them equal, you treat them with respect, I think we can take care of any challenges. And that is what my learning is all about.
Yeah, I think as far as we respect the fact that, both relationships are mutually benefiting each other, I think that's very important. You want to add something, Vikram?
Yeah, I mean, coming from the pharma industry, this becomes more paramount, because we are heavily regulated. Moving vendors or suppliers is not that easy. So I like to, there's a lot of cooperation used to happen, but I like to use the term conscious collaboration rather than being partners, So we have to collaborate with our suppliers and their suppliers and both upstream and downstream. So that conscious collaboration has to come into the value chain, and people have to understand that sharing information and data is not going to, harm you. It's only going to enable your partners and, vendors to deliver the goods in time. So in my mind, that's very important. Yeah.
Good. I think the objective of being conscious to the collaboration is it's a great insight that you've created. Guys, we are generating new management words and paradigms, and none of you sitting with a notebook and a pen. I think if I was you, I would have made all those notes because there are so many things that have been just mentioned by the panelists, that these are really, really precious, I would say, insights. Thanks, guys, doing a great job. Now I come back finally to Vikram, the second last question that I have. Though there's been a lot of discussion that supply chain process integrations will really open up the way or pave the way for better transparency, visibility, and accountability amongst all, we've been talking of this for decades now, okay. Please share with the audience here, what are those few, 2, 3 actions in your business that you thought you would have taken and have yielded a lot of results? Actions of creating transparency, actions of creating visibility, either within or outside, that have actually given a lot of benefits to the organization. And if you can share some numbers with us, how did these benefit? Where was your earlier position? Where are you now? So I think it gives some confidence to people to be able to take those actions in their own respective spheres of business.
Sure, I mean, very interesting. I mean, and the way we want to build our business processes and actions they should be built to adapt and not just built to last. So we've talked about the entire morning about VUCA and how volatility is, and she rightly coined a very nice Bani term. But our processes have to, be built to, look at the volatile situation that is coming through and how we can innovate in that situation. I mean, I like to use a term called agility, which is execution with agility. Have the execution power and still be agile to look at what the volatility is coming through. That is number one in my mind. Number two is do a lot of scenario planning. Look at plan A, plan B, because just being dependent on your A plan might not work. In today's dynamic situation, you might need to fall back to plan B. And it's not as easy as done in pharma especially, because in pharma, developing a plan B, developing an alternate vendor or a supply chain or an alternate manufacturing site is very difficult and lengthy process. But having said that, a lot of scenario plannings need to be done in my mind. You talked about visibility, but I'll talk about a lot of digitization with digital transformation, which will bring this, agility or flexibility that we talked about in the business environment and processes. So these are my top 3 takeaways to build, so-called robustness in our supply chain processes.
Good. Since we are, we have a limitation, yes. But you want to add something? Yeah, please, go ahead, yeah.
So, directly on the point in terms of the data sharing, which normally happens with a partner, a very good example, especially which comes with an e-commerce industry, is your control tower. So control tower is something which normally is shared between the vendors. So probably if I'm a L'Oreal, I'm dealing with, let's say, Amazon or Nykaa, and they are sharing with me the control tower. Now control tower is something is like a inventory detail or the stock details which is shared by my partner with me, which helps me out to understand the health of the partner, which helps me understand the quality of the stock which is there, which helps me understand the days of cover. Now that help us to take action, and this report comes on a weekly basis. So that's how data sharing is getting developed between the partners, and I think so that's a very good tool, because you will find a lot of people say that, is it okay to share a data with a partner? But I would say yes, because if you have a relationship with a partner, please go ahead and share that data, because it's always healthy for both of them. Thank you.
Great point. Now this is a question that I open up to the panel here. All of you, I know we can't work without having a greener planet anymore. Fine. So working towards a zero emission supply chain, does it look possible? And if it does, quickly, we have 7 minutes, so I can give 5 to the entire, so each of you 30 seconds, 35 seconds, sharing one quick example that you have initiative that you have taken and you think will lead to zero emission.
So I think the first and foremost step that needs to be done for going through this journey is identifying that what is your carbon emission. While in our own operations and in our extended ecosystem, it is easier, it is something that is decipherable. But when you're tracking your full value chain, how your suppliers are tracking their carbon emissions, that is something which is still a black box for this community. And establishing that number right is the first step. But as you mentioned and you pointedly said that what are a few steps that you are taking. So the first thing, and which is I think the most executable step in net carbon zero, is making your own operation sustainable, making your factory ecosystem sustainable. That's the most doable step right now, because so 2 ways to do it. One is in your entire thermal energy dependence, which is there in the factory. There, how can you become more sustainable by using biodiesel and bio-CNGs? The second, which is your grid dependence, how can you become more solar or wind dependent? And that's becoming more and more possible now with the solar avenues that we have. Now going to the tougher part, which is the transportation bit. There, EVs, of course, only last mile is the possibility, and that too not at scale right now. So the ecosystem will have to develop.
Yep.
In
You
addition
exceeded your
to
time limit, but
what
it's
Rajesh
okay.
said, I think again, solar and those EV is one part, but like a zero discharge, how we can use consume the water and then ensure that we don't discharge and recycle it. Those are things which you started.
Very good.
But
Good
zero
point.
is a target. Now we can't achieve overnight, but we need to put effort in that direction. That is what we need to be doing.
Yes.
So in e-commerce, typically we don't manufacture anything, but then our responsibility just does not end with the packaging material. We have 100% paper-based packaging material. Even the packaging tape that we use is a paper-based, and the glue is water-based, right? And of course, my partners have spoken about the EV and using the renewable energy in warehousing logistics. We have gone one step ahead, and we have decided that delivering a package is not where our responsibility ends, but what to do with that package after you take that thing out is also our responsibility. So at Click, we have something called as a circular packaging program, where you could give a missed call and somebody will come and pick up that package from you. And then of course we refurbish and reuse it or whatever do it. So it's an 360-degree end-to-end sustainability efforts that we are trying to put into it.
Good point.
Very quickly, I mean, control your controllables. You know, that's how, I mean, like he rightly said, zero is the target, but we have to control what we can control in our way. In pharma, like I can tell you a very quick example, how we are going to develop packaging for medicines, you know, how more sustainable packaging can be developed, which reduce wastage and is more eco-friendly, is one small step that we can take towards, you know, going towards that zero emission goal. Yeah, and of course, solar, EV is very common and it has to be done. Yeah.
Just to add one thing, especially with L'Oreal and we did with Garnier, is we just started off with a small factory based out in Chennai, and there we are using the plastic bottle and recycling the plastic bottle and using the same plastic into our own production. That's the one piece which we are doing on sustainability. Two, on the employment base, we are giving employment to that small village so that the people can turn up and make their livelihood better. So that's two things which we are doing it currently.
Good. Thank you very much. I think we've collected so much, you know, in the past, I would say 57 minutes of our discussion.